Today's Daf Yomi is Kiddushin Daf Pei, Kiddushin 80, and we're going to from the top line of Pei Amid Aleph of Kiddushin. You have Kiddushin?
Yes.
Yeah, the top line on Pei Amid Aleph. Really, the last three words on Ayin Tes Amud Beis, Amar Reish Lakish. For today's Daf Yomi is dedicated for Yeshua, for Am Yisrael in this Eis Tzara, and also a Zecher Nishmas, the soldiers who died today fighting selflessly for Am Yisrael. Amar Reish Lakish taught that which we said, that if a child is hanging on the mother's skirt, we can believe that this is the mother and this is the child. That it doesn't go all across the board on top of Hamid Aleph. We only say this with respect to eating truma, that if he's a Kohen, then we say that he could eat from the truma when he brings proof that this woman is share for the kahuna. Then we can rely upon her children that they say that these are her children and not other people's children. Or chalalim. But if it was respect to yichus, meaning to say, if they have daughters, we wouldn't allow those daughters to marry the kohanim until they bring further proof that they are this woman's daughters and not another person's daughters. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Afilu b'yochsin." Rabbi Yochanan says, even by yochsin, or even by lineage, we'll rely upon the fact that the children are hanging on their mother's skirt. Rabbi Yochanan follows his reasoning. Rabbi Yochanan, Malkin al chazakos, that you give lashes on the basis of a chazaka, meaning to say on something that we have a presumptive status that that's the case, even though we don't have actual witnesses. And also soklin v'sorfin al chazakos, we stone and we burn to death on the basis, we stone to death and we burn to death on the basis of chazakos. Ve'ein sorfin truma al chazakos. But we don't burn truma on the basis of presumptive status. Come on in, Habs, Boker Tov. So the Gemara says, what does this mean? We're on Pei Amid Aleph, Habs, 80a, around 7 lines on the top. What does this mean? Malkin al chazakos. What does it mean we give lashes on the basis of a presumptive status? This is like Rav Yehuda. Damar Rav Yehuda, huchsaka nida b'shcheinuseh. Let's say the women of the neighborhood had a presumptive status that this other woman was a nida. Well, why did they assume she was a nida? Because they used to wear specific clothes when a woman was in her nida cycle. So then, we never saw for sure that she was a nida, but we saw the clothes she was wearing. So and then the husband is with her when he's not allowed to. The husband will get lashes on the basis that she's a nida. What does it mean? Soklin v'sarfin al chazakos, that we execute somebody based upon the presumed status. We know of course, that there's a man is not allowed to sleep with his child and a woman not with her child. That's obviously a biblical prohibition. But let's say, Rabbi Arfuna says, Ish v'isha tinok v'tinok shegdilu b'toch habayis niskalan zal zav and nisrafin zal zeh. If you have a man and a woman, they're raising their family like husband and wife and child and son and daughter, and then they have Rahman al-Islam, the incest relationship. We don't demand witnesses to say that this child was this was the father of this child and this was the mother of this child. If they're living together, we assume that they were parents and children, and therefore we're going to give them the punishment on that basis, the very severe punishment of either stoning or burning. And I'm Rabbi Shimon Parzi, I'm Rabbi Shimon Levi, Mishim Bar Kapara, Ma'isa be'isha shabasal Yerushalayim. There's once a woman came to Jerusalem, V'tinok Murkav al Kseifa. A child was riding on her shoulders, Vig Dilaso, and she raised him, Uboa, and then they had incest, they view him based in, and they brought them to the court, Uskolim, and they stoned them. We didn't actually have proof. Nobody was there when the baby was born that he was the offspring. We didn't have 100% proof that this was the child. We don't demand that. We just need to see evidence that she raised him and he was running after her. And then we get to the last point that Rabbi Yochanan said, Ein sarfin truma ala chazakos that we don't. Rabbi Yochanan says that we don't burn truma on the basis of a chazaka. Rabbi Yochanan follows his logic. The Tanan Tinok shenimtza b'tzada isa. So ubatzik biyado. So there's a pile of mixture of flour and water, and a child is next to it. We assume that the child is tamei because the child is always touching things without really paying any attention. And now the child is holding a piece of dough, which he obviously got from this mixture of the flour and the water. So Rameir says we don't assume that the child was tamei, so the dough is still tahor. The Chachamim say no, that mixture is going to be tamei. Why? I mean, they should kids. They come into a place and they're even though they're 2 years old, they're like an engineer trying to figure out how to touch every single thing possible. So a darko shaltino kuzatafeach. The child, we assume the child touched it. But Rameir says he's tahor. Vavina by my time with Rabbi Meir. Why does Rameir say that the dough is tahor? Because Sava, Rameir's position is, this is a little bit of a tangent, but Rameir says rov tinokos with tapchin. Most little kids touch things. Umiyot emetapchin. There's a minority that don't. The isa b'chazkas taharo menas, and the dough had a presumptive status of being ritually pure. V'samach miyuto chazaka. So we combine this minority who don't touch it, and we attach it to the presumptive status of the dough. And therefore, Israel Ruba, and therefore we knock away the fact that the majority of the kids will touch it. Okay, that's Rabbi Meir's logic. But the Rabbanan who say that the dough is tahar, miyuta, they say miyuta commando le'esidami. How do we look at them if you have a majority rules? How do you look at the minority? Do you look as though they don't exist? Or do you look at it as though you could combine it to something else? So the Rabbanan say, no, the minority is not there at all. That's a very deep concept. Like, for example, somebody wins an election, 51 to 49. Does he look at the 49 as though they don't exist? Or can the 49 combine with some part of the 51 and they make a good point? So the Rabbanan say, no, we look at the minority as though it's not there. So we have a ruba versus a chazak. We have the majority of the kids touch something, but we have the presumptive status that it was tahar. Ruba, the majority rules. And so therefore we'll assume the dough is tamei. And Amar Reish Lakish Mishum Rabbi Yoshaya Zui Shesarfinu as a truma. And Reish Lakish says not only do Rabbanan say it's tamei, but we'll even burn that truma because that since the children will have a presumptive status that they touch it, and the Rabbanan are saying to burn it. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says Ein zu chazacha shesarfinu ala truma. The Rabbi Yochanan says no, that's not. The Rabbanan are not saying to burn it. The Rabbanan are saying you can't use this truma, but we suspend it. So if that's the case, under what circumstances would Rabbi Yochanan say that you actually do burn the truma? He says like the following brayos, like the Tanya, Isa b'toch habayis. Let's say you have dough inside the house. You have a bowl of dough. Ushratim utzvardayim etapon sham. Now there are 8 shratzim. These are types of like creepy crawly creatures that if they are dead, if their limbs or dead bodies touch the body parts that fell off their body, touch the dough, it makes it tamei. A frog is not one of them. So there are shratzim, like let's say a toad, and it's fardeya, which is not tamei, in the house, mitapom sham. They're running around this house, and they shed their body parts, find pieces of their body in the dough. Imrov shratzim, tameya, imrov tzfardeim tara. We have to see what's the majority in the house. The majority in the house is shratzim. Then we're going to say that Rabbi Yochanan would say you burn it even on that basis. And so therefore, because the shratzim are there more often, because therefore we're going to say under that circumstances, what's the distinction between this case? Here we have the majority of shratzim, and it overrides the chazaka that it was tahor, but also by the child, we have a majority of children touch it, and it overrides the chazaka that the dough is tahor. So why in the case of the children does Rabbi Yochanan say we don't burn it, we just suspend the truma? But in the case of the shratzim, we say we burn it. So what's the difference for Rabbi Yochanan? So Rashi tells us the fundamental difference. Because in the case of the shratzim, it's a case of ruba de isa kamanhu. It's right in front of us. We see the shratzim and we see the parts in front of us. But the case of the Tinok is Ruba de Leisa Kamanhu. We don't have the children in the house. There's one child. We don't. It's not in front of us. It's called a Ruba de Leisa Kaman, and that's a weaker majority rules than a majority rules that it is in front of us. That's the distinction that Rashi makes, a very, very important distinction for figuring out majority rules. Tanya Kavasi to Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brayso that supports Rabbi Yochanan that he says that if the Rabban, when in the case of the child who we find dough in his hand, the Rabbanan say that it's tamei, but you don't burn it. We suspend it. How so? Shnei dvarim ein b'hem das l'shayel, v'asol chachamim kamash yesh b'hem das l'shayel. That we say we have a couple of rules. The rules of Tumah are learned out from a sota. And this teaches us that if it's a doubtful case of Tumah, if it's in the private domain, we're strict. In the public domain, we're lenient. But even in the private domain where we're strict, that's only if you could ask. That it's Yeshba and Das L'Shel. But if you can't ask, we're going to be lenient. But Rabbi Yochanan is saying there are two things that even though we can't ask, we're still going to be strict. We can't ask them about the Tumah. Chachamim made them as though they do have das to ask. What are these cases? Tinok v'od acheres. One is the case of the child, and then there's a case of another one. Tinok v'od acheres. The case of the child, we're going to be strict, meaning to say, Tinok v'od acheres, but we suspend it. Tinok hada amran. Tinok is like we said, and what's the other one? V'od acheres. Let's say you have isa b'toch habayis. Let's say you have dough inside your house. V'tarnagolim umashkim tameim. You also have a hen, and you have liquid that's tamei. Tarnagolim mashkim tameim nimtzim sham. V'nimtzu, and then you find on top of pema bays, you find nikurim b'isa. You find like little specks from the hens pecking away in the dough. So tolen. Then we're going to say we say it's tamei, but we can't burn it. Lo ochim v'lo sarfin. And so that's like the case of the child. So we're going to say, Tolan, if this dough was truma, we have to be concerned that maybe the tarnagol in the hens took from the tummy liquid, and while it was still in their beaks, they pecked it. And from the fact that we say that this is a case of Tolan v'lo sarfin, that this is a case where we suspend it and we don't burn it, we see the other case is similar, the case of the child, and that's like Rabbi Yochanan that says we suspend it and we don't burn it. Comes along Rabbi Shimon Levi, coda to this piece. It's not exactly, it's a little bit of a tangent. But Rabbi Shimon Levi says, when do we say that we suspend it and we don't burn it? Where the liquid is white. But if it was a red liquid, let's say it was wine or something, or then in Isa de Nakir made the Yediyah. Then if the hen was pecking there, we would see it's red and we would know. And so therefore, even though we see the pecking marks, we're not going to say it's Tamei. Gemara says Vidilma Bo'isinu, but maybe he did peck there with the red red liquid, and it got absorbed. Vidilma Bo'isinu Isa. So Amar Rav Yochanan Davar Zeh Shama Baribi Upirushu Lo Shama. He said Rabbi Shmuel and Levi heard this, but he didn't hear. He didn't hear the explanation. What's the explanation? Well, Shana, when do we learn this principle that it applies? Lo Shanu. When do we say that this idea that by red liquids, if it's recognizable, we're going to say it's tamei. If it's mashkim tzelulim, if the liquid is very clear, and so therefore so clear that you could see a child's face in it, and under these circumstances, we have to be concerned that maybe it was absorbed in the dough. Aval mashkim akurim. But if it was a dirty one, then we wouldn't say this law, and the dough would be tahora, because since it was so dirty, it wouldn't be absorbed in the dough, and they would see if there was the red liquid there. Okay, so now we go on the very, very important topic we're going to spend the next 2 days on, God willing, about yichud. Yichud is the prohibition. We have to see some of it is biblical, some of it is rabbinic, of being secluded with a person who you're not allowed to have relations with. This is called yichud, and the rabbis and the Torah established this geder, this siyag, this fence to prevent us from committing this sin of arayos. So the Mishnah says, "Lo yisyachid adam Im Isha. So, well, Adam im shtei nashim. A man is not allowed to be secluded with two women. One man can't be secluded with two women. Avo isha achas misyachedes im shnei nashim. But one woman can be secluded with two men. And the Gemara is going to explain the distinction. Rabbi Shimon says, Af isha chad misyached im shtei nashim. Rabbi Shimon says, even one man can be secluded with two women. Bisman she'ishto imo. If one of those women is his wife, V'yashani ma'am b'pundaki, and he's allowed to sleep with them in the hotel, because his wife is going to watch him like a hawk, make sure he doesn't do anything with the other woman. Misyached adam im imo v'imbito. A man is allowed to be secluded with his mother and with his daughter. V'yashani ma'am b'kirav basar. He could even sleep with them flesh to flesh, because it's his mother and his daughter. And so therefore we don't have to be concerned. But once they're adults, then they have to sleep with their clothing on. So my time, what's the reason for the distinction that a man cannot be secluded with two women, but a woman can be secluded with two men? So the Gemara says, because the technical way to translate this is a little derogatory, but it doesn't mean what it technically translates. The technical translation is because women have lesser minds. But clearly what it means here is that women are more easily convinced to sin by the man, especially in a time where the women had much less power. This was before, I'm not saying this as a joke, before the Me Too movement. Women didn't have the ability to object as forcefully. The man could have his way with them. So therefore, even one man and two women is going to be considered yichud. But not, it's the case of Lot. Very nice. Right. Meyer points out that the fact is we have a source for this in the portion, because Lot and his two daughters, the two daughters with Lot, and we see that the yichud didn't work. A very, very sharp point by Meyer. What's the source for this halacha? Amar Rabbi Yochanan b'shem Rabbi Yishmael, Remez liyichud min Torah. So we have a hint. By the way, the Gemara could have just cited. Why didn't the Tana de Be'elyo could have just cited the pasuk of Lot? You're gonna have to look into that. Why don't they cite the pasuk of Lot and say, look, we see from here that yichud, that even though there was yichud, it didn't work. So what's the source for this idea that a man not be allowed to seclude with a woman who is prohibited? What's the hint for yichud? Now, just pause. There's a dispute amongst the Rishonim. Do we say yichud is biblical or rabbinic? According to Rashi and Tosfos, it is biblical. However, the Rambam says it is mipia Kabbalah. And the Beis Yosef says, from the language of our Gemara, it seems like the Rambam that it's rabbinic, because the Gemara says remez liyichud, a hint to yichud, which implies it's just a remez, but it's not actual biblical prohibition. But the Mishnah Lamelech writes, no, that it's biblical, and sometimes the Rambam calls the biblical law divrei Kabbalah. So okay, that's a larger discussion. I just want to make everybody aware of it. So what's the source? Rabbi Yochanan says, remez yichud min Torah, as it says, when your brother, the son of your mother, will entice you to do idolatry. There's only the son of your mother, there's only your mother's son, your maternal brother entice you, but your paternal brother does not entice you. It's to tell us that you're allowed to, it's to tell us that the son is allowed to be secluded with his mother. It's to teach us this idea that there's no yichud by mother, but in other cases there's yichud. Seems a little bit of a stretch, but okay. What's the literal verse referring to? Amar Abai, the literal verse means lo mibai kamer, meaning to say not only this, lo mibai ben av desanile. Not only should you not listen to the advice of your paternal brother because he's going to give you roads. He's going to give you bad advice because he hates you, because you're both competing for the same inheritance. Even your maternal brother do it anyway. he doesn't hate you. You might think, oh, he's giving me good advice. So Kamash wants the pasuk's telling us, don't listen to him when he tells you to worship idolatry. So our Mishnah, which says that one man cannot be secluded with two women, but two women can be secluded with two men, can be secluded with one woman. Name him as in the look Abba Shol. Let's say that our Mishnah is not like Abba Shol, because what does Abba Shol say? We learned in the Brayz. The Tanya Kol Shloshim Yom Yotzei B'Cheik V'Nikvar V'Nikvar B'Isha Achas U'Shnei Anashim. This is from the reference to Moed Katan that we're going to say the first 30 days, Kol Shloshim Yom, for the 30 days after Rahman al-Tzlan, if you have a baby who dies within 30 days, you don't need to, we learned in Moed Katan, you don't need to give him a full burial, but you could take him out in just carrying him. So Kol Shloshim Yom Yotzei B'Cheik, he can be carried out, and he's buried with just one woman and two men. We're not concerned about yichud there because it's one woman and two men. Not one man and two women because it's yichud. But Abba Shol says, Abba Shol says that you can even bury one man and two women. So you see, Abba Shol is not concerned about yichud, so he's not like our Mishnah. Mar says, I feel tema Abba Shol. You could even say our Mishnah is like Abba Shol. But there's a difference when you're going to bury a baby, Rahmano Litzlan. We've seen so many babies buried by Am Yisrael in this last month. I think they said 43 babies, 43 children from the nursery were murdered. So we've seen this terrible thing. So B'shas Aninus Taber Yatzrei. So Abba Shol says, even though generally speaking it would be yichud, one man and two women would be yichud, but in this case, because they're in such tremendous grief, it breaks the yetzer, breaks the desire. When you have such tremendous grief, it breaks the desire to live. It breaks the desire to produce children. So during this difficult time of Klal Yisrael, the people from the Am Yisrael who recognize, like after the Holocaust, they recognize just having children is such mysterious nefesh during this difficult time. Rabbanan Savrilak Rabbi Yitzchak, the Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Ma'isonin Adam Chai. So the Rabbanan who say, no, it's still yichud, and you can't allow it for one man and two women. Why? Because the Rabbanan hold like Rabbi Yitzchak, who say the following. It says in Eicha Ma'isonin Adam Chai Gever Al Chatav. It says, and we learn from there, what benefit is there for a man in his mourning? Meaning, as long as he's alive, he needs to overcome his temptation. The Chacham say, no, even when he's in the time of Aninos, the time of mourning, he has this tremendous yetzer which is trying to pull him down. Abba Shol says, no, that pasuk means that refers to somebody who's complaining about the occurrence in his life. And this is what the pasuk means. Why is this person complaining about the events that happened to him? Is he such a tzaddik that he didn't sin? Even though he sinned, he has life. So why should he complain? And the Rabbanan say no. Even during a time of brokenness, even though during a time of brokenness you don't have to be concerned about sin, nevertheless we should be concerned because they would say, okay, if that's how you interpret the pasuk, it's sometimes people will use the terrible events to try to do a sin. And there was an incident. Rashi tells us that what happened was that there was an incident, that there was a man and a woman that they smuggled out a baby who was alive as a ruse, as a way of committing adultery. And so therefore, they did this. So Rabbeinu Hananel, the Tosfos explains the name of Rabbeinu Hananel. There was a case of a woman who went to her husband's grave, and there was a man who the king commanded him to guard the dead body that was hanging from a tree. And this guardian, this guard, the security guard, seduced the woman. And when he went back, he saw that the security guard saw that the man was no longer suspended there, and he was afraid of the king because he didn't properly guard the dead body, and so therefore, the woman said to him that they should take out her husband from the grave and hang him there in the place instead of the dead body. And so from here, the Gemara brings a proof that even in time of distress, uh, she could sin. So there are all sorts of people who do terrible things. Humanity, even during the darkest times, humanity still has a desire to sin. That's what the Rabbanan's position. But if it be one woman, she can be secluded with two men. Amarav Yehuda Amarav Shanu Ela Ksherim. When do we say one woman could be secluded with two men? Only if it's a time of kosher men, of aprutzim, but men who are disgusting. She can't even be secluded with 10 men. And there was an incident, that 10 men took out a woman from the town in order to sin with her. We know that 10 men will sometimes get together for a sin. Sometimes 10 men will steal a beam together. They're not embarrassed to steal. Gemara says, name a Messiah. Let's say that there's a proof for Rav who says that this is the case that one man can be secluded, that two men can be secluded with one woman only if they're ksherim. Because it says when they bring the Sota woman to Jerusalem to test her, and they have to make sure that she's not with her husband on the road, because if she sleeps with her husband before the Sota waters, then the Sota waters won't work. So it says, you have to send 2 Torah scholars with them to make sure that they don't sin. Shema Yavo Ebederach, to make sure the husband doesn't sin with her, which proves like Rav, Talmidei Chachamim in Shei Amalo, only Torah scholars, we're not regular people. And Gemara says, no, Shani Talmidei Chachamim, the Yadei. The Torah scholars are different. The Yadei, that's Riyabei. Why does it need to be specifically Torah scholars? We want people who know how to warn her. So since they know how to warn her, that's why they need to be Torah scholars. They know how to properly give the warning. Okay, we'll just do a few more minutes, but I'll stop the recording here. So then